CFACT, the Gary Sutton Show on WSBA. Dr. Bonner Cohen is a senior fellow at the National Center for Public Policy Research and senior policy analyst with CFACT. And there's a CFACT delegation that headed to Paris to challenge the UN Climate Pact. And he is one of those policy experts from CFACT this morning. I mean, to talk a little bit about the climate, the president was over there a week ago talking about the climate at the climate conference. Kind of tried to twin climate change with terrorism. We may get into some of that with Dr. Bonner Cohen, but we wanted to talk about some of the evidence of man-made global warming. There are a lot of people, like the president, who believe in it immensely. There are many other people who say the evidence of man-made global warming is becoming more elusive. Where does Dr. Bonner Cohen fall on that? He joins us here this morning on the Gary Sutton Show. He's been with us many times before. Dr. Cohen, always a pleasure to have you on, sir. Good morning.
Well, good morning. It's always a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Dr. Cohen, the CFACT delegation heading to Paris to challenge the UN Climate Pact. Talk a little bit about exactly what's in that climate pact right now and what it is that they're challenging as they head there.
Okay, the pact that is being negotiated and presumably will be wrapped up this weekend will commit 195 countries around the world to reducing their emissions of greenhouse gases, primarily carbon dioxide, through the burning of fossil fuels, to a certain level, probably below that of 2005. They may have a sliding scale there, allowing some countries to have one a standard and certain other groups of countries to have another, and they will have to do all of that by a date certain, probably 2025 or 2030. All of that is being negotiated now. Now, I can assure you that practically none of these countries has the slightest chance of reaching any of their goals, and many of them have no intention of doing so. But what the poorer countries of the world have agreed to do is to do their dead-level best to reduce their emissions of greenhouse gases, provided, of course, they receive financial assistance from us, namely the industrialized world. And what they call this thing is the Green Energy Fund. And yesterday, Secretary of State John Kerry pledged that by the year 2020, the United States would contribute $800 million a year to be passed out to an assortment of kleptocracies around the world. This money is a direct transfer of wealth from middle-class and points-lower Americans to extremely well-to-do people in poor countries, and ostensibly for the purpose of allowing them to transform their energy production from fossil fuels to renewable energy. In truth, of course, as I think we all know, the money is simply going to line the pockets of those who are already robbing and looting their own countries. So that is what we're looking at. They will call this thing, by the way, they will not call it a treaty, even though it will be de facto a treaty, but they will call it a deal. They will call it an agreement. Why won't they call it a treaty? Because a treaty requires two-thirds vote
of the Congress.
Yeah. Exactly, and they have zero chance of getting that. They learned that with the Kyoto Protocol back in 1992. So they'll follow the example of the Iran nuclear deal, wherein which is also a de facto treaty, but the Obama administration calls it a deal. That way, they don't have to worry about the Senate voting it down, because the Senate would no more have approved the Iran deal than it will approve this thing.
So I guess the question I'm asking here, I'm looking this morning, I'm seeing China has like a code red right now on their air over there. It's apparently pretty bad. I'm looking at some of these other countries around the world, and the point that you made earlier here is that a lot of these countries don't have any thought about changing anything. They're going to sign on to a treaty, and then it's the United States. What are you doing? I mean, that's kind of where we're at, isn't it? And I'm looking this morning. Right. I've used an article this morning out of Wall Street Journal. America's middle class is no longer the majority in this country, and we're looking right now at the bill the middle class is paying for the country. And I'm looking where the middle class is between 42,000 to 126,000 in 2014, and it is shrinking. And so the middle class is feeling put upon in this country, and this is yet another reason I think many people in the middle class here say, listen, climate change is. We all agree that the climate is changing all the time. The extent to which man is causing that is where the disagreement comes, and we're looking for empirical data that everyone can agree on, and we don't have that yet.
That's right. For the simple reason that we have data, but the data show the exact opposite of what the climate alarmists would have us believe. The data show no warming whatsoever, and those are satellite readings, which are by far the most accurate. No warming over the past 18 years. What little warming we had before then, which was from the mid-1970s to the mid-1990s, was less than a degree, and it came on the heels of a cooling that took place between 1940 and the mid-1970s, which followed on the heels of a warming, which ran from 1910 to 1940. The warmest decade of the 20th century was the 1930s. So you kind of get the picture. Temperatures rise, they fall, precipitation increases, it decreases. Nature is chaotic and random, always has been, always will be. When someone says climate change, well, actually the term is redundant because the climate always changes. And as you correctly pointed out, the real question here is what influence does man have on that? And specifically, what evidence is there that the use of fossil fuels, coal, natural gas, and oil, are contributing to the buildup of so-called heat-trapping gases in the atmosphere.
So let me ask.
That's a big theory.
Yeah.
But look at the observations, and they don't confirm it. So if you have a hypothesis, okay, let's go out and test the hypothesis. You go out and say, well, wait a minute, this isn't being confirmed by anything. Remember, these people used to call this global warming. They had to rebrand it to climate change.
Well, I hear a lot of the saying, this is the warmest year on record. Okay, I want to ask you about that. But I also want to ask you about, is there any evidence out there? Because I know there are a lot of people that buy into global warming because they say, well, this scientist says this is the way it is, or these scientists say this is the way it is. And so I want to ask you, from the standpoint of the energy that we use, from fossil fuels, from coal to oil to the other things, and the exhausts that are given off, and you know, we hear all kinds of things, including flatulation of cows. But right. Point being, is there any evidence that those are affecting us adversely in raising the temperature or in claiming or changing the climate in some adverse way, even in the collection of CO2? We hear a lot about that as well. If you could separate that out for me, I'd be in your debt.
Oh, yes. Well, the evidence actually is that it's highly beneficial. Yes, there has been a buildup of CO2 in the atmosphere. It's roughly 400 parts per million now, up from 250 parts per million at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution,
right,
in the mid-18th century.
When no one cared a whole lot about the smoke that was going to the sky, right?
Exactly. And what has happened is, as everybody who's had a biology class in high school knows, carbon dioxide, or CO2, is plant food. And as the Earth's population continues to grow, and it will grow until roughly the middle of this century, then it's going to start leveling off and declining rapidly. But we have between 7 and 8 billion people on the Earth to feed. For that, we need agriculture. And to have thriving agriculture, we need crops to grow. And for crops to grow, among other things, we need CO2. So what has happened has actually been highly beneficial. Agricultural productivity is higher than ever before. Some of that has to do, of course, with improvements in technology, but a lot of it has to do with the fact that there is a growing amount of CO2 in the atmosphere that is enabling that. When people tell us, well, we have dangerous levels of CO2, complete nonsense, because if you look at geological history, which is the only context that really matters, you will see that in the past we had levels of CO2 in the Earth which were far higher than they are now, and we even had higher levels of CO2 during ice ages. So the connection between levels of CO2 and rising temperatures does not exist. Again, it's part of a theory, but the theory has not been confirmed by observations. If anything, levels of CO2 are actually, if they build up, they're actually a lagging indicator of temperature rises, but they're rising for their own reasons, which have nothing whatsoever to do with CO2, just as they will decline. Because in reality, we're between the last ice age and the next one. Well, that's why we call this, what we're in, an interglacial period. We've had 17 ice ages in the last 2 million years, and believe me, number 18 is going to come. Probably in a few thousand years. I don't think anybody listening to this program is going to experience it, and you don't want to experience it because ice ages are horrible things. But it will, because that's just the climate that Mother Nature is going to serve up. Always have serves up, and always will serve up. And all of this nonsense that's going on in Paris, and all of these commitments that are being made, and all these money pots and slush funds that are being created by our elites, contrary to our own interest, they will have no effect on that whatsoever.
We're talking with Dr. Bonner Cohen this morning, Senior Fellow at the National Center for Public Policy Research and Senior Policy Analyst with CFACT. I want to take a call here, Dr. Cohen. We have John in Red Lion. John, you're on the show with Dr. Bonner Cohen. Go ahead, John. Your turn to make the call and ask a question.
Mr. Bonner is the first person I ever heard come out and state exactly what is going on. My question is, where are these people keeping their slush fund? I mean, people, not groups. People. And that's pretty much it.
Well, we got the point, though, John. Thank you for your call.
Got the point. Exactly. You have people like John Kerry, who had the good fortune to marry his money, so he's not going to have to worry about rising electricity costs, because his wife Teresa Hines is going to take care of that. You in Pennsylvania know all about Hines, but so he's going to take care of that. So he's committing all sorts of money, but Congress will have to appropriate that money. This Congress will never appropriate anything like that. But other countries could probably bludgeon their populations. Other countries, wealthier countries, Europe, Japan, they may be able to bludgeon their populations into coming up with these slush funds that will, again, simply be transfers of wealth from those people from countries that are already hopelessly indebted, the United States, to the tune of $19 trillion, to a bunch of crooks who run countries elsewhere, who have made pledges they have absolutely no intention whatsoever of keeping, but of course they'd be delighted to take our money.
Absolutely. We're always delighted to take someone else's money. That's human nature. But one of the things your group, CFACT, has said, the climate merely serves as the pretext for governments to seize control of energy production, to prop up an otherwise uncompetitive renewable energy industry, to transfer wealth from poor people in rich countries to rich people in poor countries, and to further empower green elites in the relentless campaign against ordinary people. I've never heard it summed up in 4 great points as well as that's been summed up.
Right. I had lots of coffee that morning when I wrote that, so I was wired. But actually, I'm afraid every word of that is true. And what you see in this is a scheme that has been devised to keep, as I said, otherwise a non-competitive renewable energy industry. What they're really trying to do now is say, we need to phase out fossil fuels, which are both affordable and reliable and highly abundant, particularly in the United States, and replace those fossil fuels with renewable energy. Windmills, solar panels, pixie dust.
Why, as I listen to you, do I hear the word manipulation coming into my mind here?
Of course.
That you fix something so you get the self-fulfilling prophecy that you want. I mean, we can all fix something if we have the power to do it, and manipulate it so we can get it to where we want it to go. If we have the power to take certain things away and put other things in.
Right, but of course the problem is you can't get there from here. Take renewable energy. Germany abandoned, foolishly in my view, nuclear energy in the wake of the Fukushima disaster a few years ago. So they said, okay, we're going to switch over to wind, and they have lots of wind in the North Sea, and we're going to go from wind and solar. What they have found is their electricity prices, A, skyrocketed like crazy, B, wind and solar are highly dependent on weather.
Yes.
In other words, when the wind blows, fine. But if the wind doesn't blow, you're in a world of hurt. And nobody stopped to think, wait a minute, at nightfall there is no sun. So, and all of this has completely screwed up the German power grid, which was in better shape than ours.
And I want to jump in there very quickly. If we can continue that conversation, I just have to take a very quick break. We're going to come back on the other side. And Dr. Bonner Cohen picking it apart right here, headed off to Paris to maybe fight back against what the UN Climate Pact is going to be. Howard Newpark's got a call. We'll get that as well when we come back. Dr. Bonner Cohen, Senior Fellow at the National Center for Public Policy Research and Senior Policy Analyst with CFACT, here on the Gary Sutton Show. Back right after this. Welcome back to the Gary Sutton Show on WSBA. Dr. Bonner Cohen with us, who's a senior fellow at the National Center for Public Policy Research and a senior policy analyst with CFACT. And you were making a point there before we went to the break, Dr. Cohen, and I kind of jumped in on you. I apologize.
That's okay. We have to pay some bills.
Every now and then we do that, yeah.
Every now and then, right. But the point I was making was that Germany has been at the forefront of making a transition from fossil fuels and also doing away with its nuclear power and going to increase use of renewable energy, wind and solar, and it has been an absolute disaster. It has been a disaster for residential ratepayers who have seen the price of electricity go sky high. It has been a disaster for German companies who are even less competitive than they otherwise were because their products cost more, because they're paying more for electricity, and it has undermined the reliability of the German grid. So rather than learn from what has happened in Germany, the powers that be in this country, in the Obama administration, are absolutely determined to impose the same conditions here. And if they do that, de-emphasizing fossil fuels, driving up artificially the cost of fossil fuels so that wind and solar can be competitive, mandating the use of wind and solar, and otherwise making it extremely difficult for fossil fuels to function, then they can make the price differential between the two more or less disappear, but at the cost of reliability, because when the wind doesn't blow, those gigantic, ugly wind turbines that are springing up all over the country don't function. They're springing up all over the country, A, because of mandates that certain states have been foolish enough to impose, and B, we subsidize those things, we being U.S. taxpayers. Take away the mandates, take away the subsidies, right. The wind turbines would be gone with the wind very quickly, as would the solar industry, which we also prop up artificially. But these are the people who stand to benefit from all of this nonsense that's going on in Paris. These are the people who've invested a huge amount of money, made a very generous campaign contributions. Like
the Tom Steyers of the world you're talking about?
That's right. And so what they're doing is they're rigging the game.
Yep.
They're throwing out the market and making sure that their political and business cronies are taken care of. And this is all being done in the name of protecting the climate, when, as a matter of fact, they're simply lining their own pockets.
Which, by the way, is the same argument they've been making about industry for a long time. Well, look at them. They're making all this money off all this filth and all this pollution and all this stuff. And they figure, well, it's us making the argument now, so it's okay. We're owed that.
That's right.
Yeah, what if we're going to call her very quickly, Dr. Cohen? He's Howard in New Park. Howard, you're on the Gary Sutton Show with Dr. Bonner Cohen. Go ahead, Howard. Your turn to make the call.
Good morning. I hope you haven't discussed this earlier. I couldn't hear the whole program, but I understand I'd like the doctor's opinion on what is going on in Congress. Yesterday on C-SPAN, they were supposed to have showing hearings about the intimidation. The college professors are being told if they don't have tenure, they'll never get it if they dispute global warming. And I believe there's one of the top people that's knowledgeable is a professor at MIT who has tenure, and they can't shut him up. He's just giving the facts. But it sounds like in Nazi Germany, when they Nazified chemistry, physics, the sciences, they put the political part in it.
Oh, well, let's get a reaction from Dr. Cohen.
That's a great point, because this is rampant at colleges and universities across the country and other research institutions.
It's all but religious, isn't it? It's all but religious.
Oh, yeah. If you've published papers, then you have a paper trail, and believe me, the federal government passes out grants according to what you have written in the past. And if you have dared call into question the notion of human-induced global warming through the burning of fossil fuels, and if you have dared point out that the data do not support the theory, then believe me, you're going to be cut off, and you're going to be cut off at the knees, and in some cases, you're not even going to get tenure. And that's the point. The caller was making, Richard Linson was the guy at MIT who was pointing that out. Another professor is Judith Curry at Georgia Tech in Atlanta, who also says, I get away with this because I have tenure, and they can't get rid of me, although they would love to do so. She is even more intriguing because she originally supported the theory. She said, but she looked at the data and said, wait a minute, the data do not back the treaty, data do not back up the theory, and she has concluded that the whole thing is largely completely hype, and she has pointed out, which is what the caller did, that you have an atmosphere of intimidation that exists everywhere in the country today. So we would like to think all of this scientific research is being done without a political agenda in mind. Unfortunately, that is not the case.
And, of course, last week we heard the president make at the Paris summit, I guess it was last week or 2 weeks ago. I'm trying. Time is running together very quickly now. And basically kind of started to twin, but didn't quite do it totally, climate change and terrorism, which for a lot of us out there is kind of despicable. Frankly, the idea of trying to twin climate change with terrorism, John Kerry did the same thing. Right. It's people are saying how foolish Donald Trump is and saying a lot of things he's saying. I would say, and they're not criticizing this kind of statement. Are you nuts? I mean, what's going on? Your thoughts?
Yeah, it shows you the depths to which Obama, Kerry, for that matter, Bernie Sanders and others are willing to go to sell the goods that they're trying to peddle in the country, wedding, if you will, the real threat of terror with the phony threat of human-induced climate change, with the sole purpose of trying to scare people into doing things which are manifestly contrary to their own interests. The very last thing this country wants to do with an economy that's slouching along at an absolutely pathetic rate, and has been doing that for years, is to impose additional costs on consumers in this country, on families, on businesses, which is the desired result of the whole climate change agenda. Shut down the coal industry, destroy it, and then you go after the natural gas industry, and then you will go after others, and have energy policy in this country not determined by the marketplace, not determined by inquiring minds, but rather determined by faceless and unaccountable and unelected bureaucrats at EPA and at other agencies throughout the country, which are chock full of political appointees of the Obama administration, drawn from environmental groups around the country, the usual suspects, Sierra Club, NRDC, Environmental Defense Fund, all of whom are absolutely determined to allocate power to themselves through the administrative regulatory state, circumvent Congress as much as they can, and treat the American people like serfs, not like citizens.
Dr. Cohen, I don't know what I can add to that, so I'm going to have to add goodbye this morning. It's been a great time talking with you. I always enjoy it. We're going to get this up tomorrow at facebook.com/910WSBA. Great half hour. Thank you for the information as always, and I look forward to our next time very soon. And if I don't get a chance between now and then,
thank you very much.
Well, Merry Christmas to you. Thank you so much.
Merry Christmas.
Take care. Dr. Bonner Cohen with us on the Gary Sutton Show on WSBA. Brian says he has a great Barry White voice, and I think he's right. That's as deep a voice we've ever had in this show.